Hello, pleasure to be here with you. Yes, indeed, there is. And what we're seeing is that there are a lot of new opportunities on the horizon. And this is something I will talk a lot more about in my presentation. But what we also know that women are not always able to capture those opportunities at the same rate as men. And I think there's a lot to do around bridging those gaps and having a very forward thinking way to think about bridging gender gaps.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think that we look forward now to your presentation on the future of jobs.
Great, thank you. And let me just preface this by sharing a little bit more around how the World Economic Forum started tracking this phenomena. In around 2014, 2015, we had a lot of businesses come to us and tell us this is something that is incredibly important, that it is on the horizon, that companies are facing more and more new technological adoption. And at the same time, that's driving a disruption to jobs that is going to be quite meaningful for labor markets everywhere. So this report that I'm going to share more about now and the agenda of work that it has led to is in its third edition. And all those editions have been quite consistent in one key message. And that is that there is a lot of opportunity on the horizon. There is a lot of opportunity for new roles, roles that are more interesting, more engaging, in some cases safer, but it does require a lot of adaptation. And it requires adaptation that has to be proactive, that has to leverage a lot of the levers that the speakers before me mentioned. How do we work in this new era? How do we reskill in the middle of careers? So let me just jump straight in. Essentially, what we're seeing is that machines, and not just physical machines, but also algorithms, are incurring into our workplace. And whereas today, in conversation with business leaders, we've been able to estimate that the split is roughly 70-30. What we expect will happen by 2025 is the split is going to be 50-50. So we'll be sharing work with different technologies. And there's going to be a kind of a division of labor that is fully new. In parallel, we are all facing a wholly new world driven by the adaptation to the COVID pandemic. And that has included a scaling of remote work. This is a process that was already in place before. Some companies, and in particular some sectors, had a lot more remote working opportunities. But now about 80% of companies are telling us they're scaling their remote work capabilities. And this is essential now to be able to have some continuity in the labor market, but it's also something that is likely to lead to long-term changes. They're also scaling digitization, but in addition, automation. And so these three trends are really going in parallel. So let me tell you a little bit more about these technologies that we're talking about. We've all heard about them to some degree, but there are some industry nuances that are also interesting and important. Overall, there are a few that are really, really the big technologies that companies are adapting and that are then driving these changes to jobs and skills. Cloud computing, big data analytics, Internet of Things, they're really the big three. And this shouldn't be a surprise because we've heard about it, but it's a tangible reality. So we see that as many as 80-90% of companies are sometimes thinking, I'm definitely adapting this technology on a global level. The footprint is different in different industries. So for example, if we look at the mining and metals and oil and gas industries, they're a lot more likely to be adapting to including robots. And we're not talking about humanoid robots that talk to you really. We're talking about robots that will go into mines and do some of those tasks that are maybe less safe for human beings. So when we break that down to what happens on the level of work, we often think of the tasks that people do at work. And there are a few tasks that are really going to be much more heavily automated than others. Tasks like information and data processing, some performance of technical activities, looking up information, some of those administrative activities that were maybe done in quite a manual, repetitive way. Those can be done by machines, but there are also aspects of work that cannot be done by automation, that cannot be done by a machine. It's something that a human will need to do. And that is a lot more of the work around reasoning and decision making, around communication, about coordinating and developing work. So what that means is the skills that humans are going to be best at, the ones that are going to really set us up for success, are very human skills. Our ability to analyze and think, our ability to learn and adapt, our ability to solve complex problems and to be creative. And whereas in the world of work that we are starting to exit, it was just as important to kind of know how to do very routine, repetitive work year on year. These newer, more dynamic and more creative skills are really going to be at the core of work in the future. And whilst this is intimidating, we know that this should also have give us an opportunity to actually prosper in the new world of work, because we've done some modeling and so have a lot of leading experts out there. And in the aggregate, that doesn't actually mean that while some jobs will be destroyed, there won't be relevant job growth and job demand. So we are also likely to see a net job growth. But the question is really going to be, how can people capture those opportunities and how can they adapt to these opportunities? And in those roles that we're talking about, again, no big surprises. We're talking about big data specialists. We're talking about automation specialists. We're talking about AI roles. But on the other hand, when we look at what might be automated, what it's maybe going to be a little bit concerning for some of the individuals looking at these roles is, okay, so this also includes white collar roles that we thought were reasonably safe. Roles like accounting, which do have this aspect of reasonably repetitive work that can in fact be partially automated. So it's important to really understand the trends and map those trends and do this in a very data-driven way in order to really think with where is opportunity going to lie. And we've actually done one such experiment. We've worked with LinkedIn Technologies and we've worked with the teams there very productively for many years now to understand what are the big clusters that are growing right now. So if you look at 30 economies globally, what are the roles that consistently grow? And we've been able to do this in a very data-rich way and to cluster roles according to their unique skills DNA. And we see that those are a few roles that are definitely very technology heavy, roles like cloud computing, roles like data and AI, but there are also roles that are very human, people and culture roles. So how you manage people within organizations is going to be very important. Sales is going to be very important. Content production, so being able to tell stories about what's happening in the world is going to be important. And then again, you see here, there are actually a couple of job families that we know are very important, like care work and green work, that is not possible to cover it through this particular data source, but we're leaving them here to just remind everybody, yes, like the commission mentioned, the green economy is going to be a key aspect of how we grow in the future. So what does this mean for workers? This has to be an era of career pivots. We are not saying in any of our projections that really there is no opportunity in the labor market. There is a lot of opportunity. But overall, it does mean that it disrupts a pattern that we knew very well in the past, where you go through an education trajectory early on in your life, and then you progressively move through a career that is reasonably linear. And in fact, we're moving to a world where people are going to need to make a lot more pivots into different professions through mid-career reskilling and upskilling opportunities. So you'll see in the next slide, we've really actually looked at this again in a big data way and seen what has happened. Is this actually happening in the labor market? And you see on the left are actually a set of roles currently established in the labor market. On the right-hand side, and this is looking at it in the global scale, on the right-hand side are these new professions. And people are already reallocating into those new professions in quite an organic way. And we know that with the context of COVID-19, when we have a labor market really in flux, this is probably going to accelerate. Now, The next moment really is about saying, how can we power this? We know companies also really want to support those transitions. The companies we surveyed through the World Economic Forum's network told us that they want to redeploy internally about 50% of people who might be displaced as a result of the processes we mentioned at the forefront. But it requires understanding skills. So 50% of employees will need significant reskilling in order to pivot. And then around 40% of all skills are going to be in flux in the next 5 years. So what we are actually seeing is a need for investing in training. And this is something that was already echoed by my colleagues early in the set of presentations. Really, this is something that is very important. And for any of the professions that we're looking at, there's actually a different time horizon on how long that investment is going to have to be, both for the worker and for the employer. So we've done this work with Coursera, who, as you know, have very interesting and rich offerings for reskilling and upskilling. And we've been able to estimate for those different careers that are really growing, how many months do you roughly need to start learning into these different careers? So for something like cloud computing and engineering, it's 4 to 5 months. If something like sales and marketing, the new roles in sales and marketing, so not necessarily the traditional roles that are already established in the labor market, it's 1 to 2 months. And for companies, the good thing is that actually most expect they get a return on that investment within a year. So there is a positive aspect here where even if there is not a rich public sector infrastructure for this, the private sector can actually reskill a number of the workers that are being displaced with a return on investment within the year. So this needs to be something that is really seriously considered. We do have a lot of rich data about also what might be the skills footprint we're looking for here. So for example, here, this is again some data we have through our partnership with Coursera, and we can see what are the courses that people study when they want to go into a data and AI career. And what is the typical mastery gap between somebody who's already in that role and somebody who's looking to move into that role. And this is actually how we arrive at these estimations of how would anybody transition, how long would it take, how do you actually get down to doing the work to pivot into a growing career. And two complementary aspects here is what else do we need as infrastructure? So we actually have a lot more data on labor markets, and this is key for the current moment. The other aspect that is very important is understanding skills. So the unit on which we're going to actually transition people is mostly going to be adding the relevant and key skills. So part of the work we've been doing in the past year has really been to work with reskilling providers, with companies, and with data providers to actually think, what are those skills? And there's some great examples of this project also in the European level and crosswalks between the different skill sets. But let me just quickly preview the work we just launched in our Davos Agenda Week just now. So we've developed a taxonomy that is really a translation mechanism between different systems that we've seen out there, and we'll be adding to this the kinds of courses that are available to reskill individuals. And we can see, you can really break down the skills and knowledge that a worker can do into business skills, innovation and creativity skills, digital and technology skills, and obviously languages, multilingualism, the ability to communicate between barriers. There are a set of skills that are industry specialized, and that requires a lot of in-depth knowledge. But we do know a lot more about what is under the hood of digital skills. We do know that within this, you can actually think about digital marketing, you can actually think about scientific computing, and so on. In addition, on that aspect I mentioned earlier, the need to actually have attitudinal skills. This has been something that has been very underdeveloped to date, but we've also been able to work with a lot of senior business leaders in order to map what are those skills, and also kind of looking to also ESCO and the work that has been done in that context, and itemize how would we define the working with people skills? how do we define self-management skills, the ability to actually shape yourself in a way that you can interact well with others? And also, what does it take to be a responsible global citizen, to have a civic responsibility? So just to summarize and wrap this up, essentially what we're talking about is a key strategy for the future of work and skills. And that strategy has to be a good job strategy. It has to be about creating quality employment in the benefit of both workers, but also of companies. Because by powering people with the right skills, you're really also powering your economy with one of its most important resources, which is the skills and capabilities of people, human capital. And the big unlocking mechanism here will be to actually find a way to deliver mid-career reskilling and upskilling in collaboration between the public and private sector in a meaningful way. And that means that companies need people metrics where they actually track their investment in training, where they track their commitment to decent work and their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, so that actually when people retrain, they know that their merit is going to be reflected in their progression and they're motivated to take on learning. But it also means finding that way to effectively transition people from declining to emerging roles through well-funded reskilling and upskilling mechanisms. And those mechanisms really are very well shared between the private and the public sector, because as I mentioned before, this is something that the private sector, because it can in some cases do on their own, because that return on investment is within a year horizon. But in some cases, we do really need those very sound public institutions that will support this change as well. So just to quickly end on what we at the World Economic Forum are doing, there are a couple of publications to look up in case you're interested in this, the overall Future of Jobs report, but also some case studies from our business community and what they've been doing, and a toolkit that really looks on how to start unlocking diversity, equity, and inclusion in the current era. And finally, the Skills Taxonomy paper, which was published in about a month ago. And we have two key initiatives through which we're trying to drive this work. One very much focused on industry transformation and transforming employment for the future of work, and the other in public-private collaboration in a country level. So at this, thank you very much for your attention, and very happy to take any questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Ratcheva, for that data-rich and analytical presentation. And as always, Zane has a handful of questions to ask for you. Zane.
Yes, so again, a couple of questions from me and a couple from audiences. We are running out of time, but still, you have incredible wealth of data, and I think that's what makes it, so impressive and important and valuable. My question is, if you look at all the countries, could you say which countries seem to have figured out what to do about upskilling, reskilling, or continuous learning? Which countries we should currently look at and learn from?
Certainly. So there are two models that we've looked to that seem to have very dynamic, interesting ways of approaching this. I'm sorry about my camera issues today. Sometimes technology is not our friend. One is definitely Singapore, where there has been a very dynamic exchange between the training providers and also the government, who are mapping through a very data-rich way what are the opportunities for people to transition and really painting the full career ladder. Another is certainly the Danish model and the way they've worked with, again, training in the context of workplace displacement. But there are a lot of companies and governments who are taking on interesting experiments right now. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, and it's something that is in the focus and attention of a lot of agencies, and we hope to see a lot of innovation in the coming months.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll have also a Danish example, which I'm very excited about. And then the question, the second question is more for individuals, so all the ones who are watching and wondering what they should learn. So obviously we see, you know, a lot of concepts like automation, digitalization, many talk about digital skills, but at the end of the day, you log in Coursera and wonder, so which would you say would be, you know, 3 no regrets skills, if one can use that name for everyone to study?
Certainly, that is an excellent question. There are 2 answers to this. One is understanding the global trends and what is growing globally. The other one is understanding the local labor market and what are the opportunities nearby. And within this, it is important to connect the skills to the labor market opportunities. Within this, what we do know is that data skills are, of course, important. The technology skills are, of course, important, but so are all the people skills we mentioned earlier, their ability to be creative. So I'm not sure if there is a definitive one-size-fits-all answer, but being able to invest in one's ability to handle data and one's ability to work with people and with one's own kind of aptitudes is definitely a very strong contender for the silver bullet. And as the commissioner mentioned, the ability to actually learn as the overarching mechanism that is going to be very key for everybody.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, I would ask a couple more questions from myself, but we have a couple of questions from the audience. So let me just ask 2. So can we say that today human beings are starting to compete? And now where the question disappeared? Just a second. Okay. Can we pull back the question of competing with computers? Okay. That obviously disappeared. We'll make sure we ask that question to you separately and put the text in writing, but we have, okay, here it came back. So can we say that today human beings are starting to compete with machines? Where will this competition lead? Should we tax income from machine work or use it for education and general welfare? So universal basic income question. And I know it's a very large question, but still.
It's definitely something that's on the agenda of many governments, and it's definitely something that we are looking into at the moment as a point of research. There is no indication that human labor is going to be in any way redundant. The question is more, how are we going to transition and how much time will be needed, especially in the context of COVID-19, where labor markets are disrupted, where some individuals in those labor markets are facing real hardship. So there is definitely a significant appeal to thinking of more stable ways to ensure income in the current context, especially because there has been this significant amount of employment destruction, really. But we do think that there is a horizon of work that is very positive. So it's really about kind of stability in the short term. And we need to think with what those right mechanisms are. There are a lot of rich conversations going on, but not yet any consensus.
Thank you. And one more question for the audience is addressed to you. So what is your view of job guarantee scheme whereby a person willing to work would be guaranteed a job by the public sector, thus effectively replacing minimum wage policy in effort to achieve full employment?
So from the perspective of are there likely to be plentiful jobs if we have a healthy, thriving market and labor market? Yes. So in that aspect, what's important is to make sure people are in the process of being reskilled into those opportunities. And we know that people can actually transition into jobs way before they have the 100% skill set for those roles. That is one other aspect of the data work that we've done. And it has actually clearly demonstrated through those transitions seen on LinkedIn that people transition before they have the optimum skill sets, and they can gain those skills on the job. So you can work and learn essentially. And that is an intervention that needs to happen also at the level of how companies recruit and how much they recruit on aptitude and how much they invest in training after they recruit on aptitude.
Thank you. Again, I hope we will continue this conversation, but we have to go ahead.